Good morning, dear colleagues. It's time to start with our third and final day of presentations. And this session will be led by a Latvian colleague, Kristiānis Rimšans. He's a Latvian master metalwork conservator restorer with 8 years of experience at the National History Museum of Latvia. Alongside his professional practice, he works as an independent conservator restorer and serves as a board member of the Society of Latvian Restorers. Kristiānis, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is having a good time here in the conference. And this is our third day, and there are many more interesting topics to talk about. And today I will start with our first guest here. I would like to introduce our speaker from the United Kingdom, Zenzie Tinker. She's a bachelor's degree in history with honors, accredited conservator, restorer, founder of one of the United Kingdom's largest private textile conservation practices, and a highly experienced specialist in historic textile and tapestries. Today, she will present on managing large-scale textile conservation projects. Please, Zenzie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's a huge honour to be here today. Thank you so much to Nelly and the Conservation Committee for inviting me. It's been a fabulous conference for me so far, so I hope today will be equally good. In my presentation today, I hope to outline the way in which an experienced commercial textile conservation studio in the UK manages large-scale projects. I'm going to focus on the conservation and mounting of 12 life-sized clothed royal funeral effigies dating from between 1603 to 1806 for Westminster Abbey. And then I'm going to parallel that with 10 sets of historic, modern and contemporary motorcycle leathers that were used in the TT motorcycle race on the Isle of Man. Motorcycle fans will know about this race. Following the main chronology of how we managed our conservation projects, I'll show how we undertook the condition assessment, set budgets, established client relationships, and how we managed our time and organised the work. I will also try to explain how these diverse objects were mounted and briefly discuss the role of the unique effigy body versus the development of our dynamic mannequin for the motorcycle project, and also touch on the importance of research in achieving an engaged and successful, an engaged team and a successful result. The way we manage large-scale complex projects at my studio in Brighton has evolved iteratively and intuitively as the studio has grown over the last 2.5 decades. For much of our time in business, we've been a substantially sized team of 10 or so textile conservators and 1 paper conservator. And an early realization was that things certainly work better when we have an experienced administrator helping me run the studio. The business can seem like a hungry beast that needs constantly feeding, and looking after this beast involves running multiple current projects whilst constantly seeking out future work or risk everyone going hungry. Flexibility of approach and a thirst for problem solving are probably the key elements to managing the studio and our work programme, and also the maintenance of a skilled and stable team. In the UK, it's more common for freelance textile conservators to work alone or in small groups. So our size means that we tend to get offered projects that require larger teams, enabling us to develop expertise and experience with these more complex ventures. One needs a very clear, logical approach to managing not just the project itself, but how it will impact the rest of the work programme and the team. By their nature, large-scale projects can take many months or even years to complete, so one needs to manage and maintain the high quality and consistency of the work, as well as the enthusiasm and staying power of the team and the client. Often the treatments themselves are tricky, and if the work needs to be undertaken on site, this can be even more difficult, as bringing the team's best work to site work situations can be challenging. For this discussion, large-scale textile conservation projects can describe several different scenarios. The first example are large-scale textile projects, large textiles that need lots of people just to physically handle them and achieve the work. And the examples that you can see here on the right, the assessment and cleaning of Morris & Co. tapestries dating from the 1930s at Lancing College in Sussex, which measure almost 100 square metres and necessitated the largest scaffolding we've ever commissioned. And on the left, the Pomona woven wall hangings by contemporary artist Pay White, which total 108 square metres, and these hang in the Bloomberg headquarters in London. And they are a three-part work that are stretched taut around a circular room, so that presents quite a few challenges. Then there are the large-scale projects that require a huge number of hours, and this is one example from the National Maritime Museum. It's a 1670s Solvay tapestry, which is a 22 square metre tapestry requiring 4,500 hours of conservation. We've also conserved several sets of tapestries, such as these three from Arundel Castle. These are 18th century Nouvelle Indies series, more than 6,500 hours work. So many of our projects take more than 1,000 hours. And then there are the rather large scale and complexity projects, such as the project shown on the left, which was the deinstallation, solvent and wet cleaning and conservation and rehanging of 120 square metres of wool wall hanging made by Morris & Co. for the Ironmongers Hall in London, or the emergency treatment and conservation of more than 100 water-damaged textiles and items and dress from a local museum. In the published paper, I also talk about a couple of National Trust projects, but I wasn't able to get permission to use images here today, I'm afraid, so you can look up about those if you're interested, and those projects have also been published. And of course, large-scale projects frequently fall into all of these categories at the same time, being large in scale, complex, and large in the hours required to conserve them. And examples of those might be state beds. We have a lot of state beds in England, and they are huge, enormous four-poster beds covered in textiles and passementerie. So now let's focus on the featured projects today. I've selected these two projects for greater discussion. The first are the Royal Funeral Effigies project for Westminster Abbey, which involved the conservation and representation of 12 clothed life-size effigies and their 350 items of layered clothing. Since medieval times, funeral effigies were traditionally made and processed in the funeral cortege of kings and queens, and then they were placed by the tomb in Westminster Abbey and left to stand next to the tomb. So they've been on constant display since they were made. And there are medieval ones as well, but obviously they've lost their clothing. And this will be contrasted with the conservation and mounting and dynamic display of 10 sets of tourist trophy, which I will call the TT motorcycle race. This is a road race around the Isle of Man, and it's the most dangerous motorcycle race in the world, and they just race around the roads and the mountains at very, very high speeds. And the leathers date from 1907, when the race started, to the present day, and they needed a new gallery to represent this famous race in the Manx Museum. Both these projects have been presented and published, so if you want to find out more details, you can find those online and in publications if you're interested. On first consideration, these projects could not be more different in their date, subject matter, materiality, and historic context. However, there are many similarities, and the skills honed through the successful delivery of the Effigies project well prepared us for the additional challenge of delivering the TT project during the pandemic. The first challenge was the assessment period. With the effigies, we had to do our condition assessments and help set the budgets by examining the multi-layered garments through the glass. We couldn't really even get into the display cases because they were too tightly packed and the wax elements were too fragile. We relied on old published descriptions, our costume conservation experience to estimate their condition and their conservation needs. And similarly with the TT motorcycle outfits, the pandemic made a visit to actually examine the objects impossible. So we had to rely on non-specialist conservators' very basic condition assessments, some photographs and a couple of wobbly Zoom meetings. And if any of you have tried to examine objects on Zoom, you'll know it makes you feel very sick. Both projects involved the conservation and mounting of complex, multi-layered or multi-part costumes. The importance of being able to accurately, mentally break down every single component of each outfit and visualize each step of the process from documentation through cleaning, treatment, underpinning, and mounting cannot be overstated. With Westminster Abbey, a form like the one you can see here in the middle of the slide was created for each effigy, broken down into a treatment proposal and estimate for each item of clothing that we assumed was there. And then these 350 or so assessments, as well as the effigies, were saved into spreadsheets. As it turned out, when we did actually get access to the objects and start undressing, there were some hidden items that nobody knew about underneath the layers. But we had to come up with this budget so that the client knew how much money the conservation would need. It's for that reason, well, complex projects, obviously, as you must know, can change as they go along. So one needs to add contingency. And our experience is that ballpark figures are rarely processed by the client as being ballpark figures. When you give a range, you know, from say 100,000 to 150,000, the client just takes on board the 100,000. And they can often set their budgets on that lower figure. So you have to think very carefully about ballpark figures. And for your reference, the Westminster Abbey project was about 3,200 hours, and that was negotiated down by the client from at least 4,000 hours. And the TT project was for around 2,500 hours. And again, budget constraints meant we had to lower our expectation on the conservation a bit. Just talk a little bit about client-conservator relationships. With both these projects, the clients knew what they wanted to achieve in terms of outcome, and that they didn't want the objects still looking like this. So basically, motorcycle leathers are often just mounted vertically, and they don't make sense without the motorbikes. And the same with the effigies. They looked very tired from many, many, many years on display. Westminster Abbey wanted to spruce up their very tired-looking effigies that had been on display since their creation, and they needed the conservation to kind of re-regalize them. Westminster Abbey is the royal family's abbey, and obviously has a strong connection with royalty. They also required documentation to bring the monitoring and care of this unique historic collection into the 21st century, because they weren't documented properly. The Manx Museum knew that they needed to commission major conservation of some of their recently acquired leathers, which had really been kept as trophies in enthusiasts' garages and motorcycle workshops, so they were quite damaged and dirty. And so they sought out textile conservators with proven costume and leather experience and mounting experience. They wanted to display the leathers over their original motorcycles in convincing racing poses, but they didn't know how to achieve this with museum mannequins that were commercially available. And I should also say that both these projects were conceived as permanent displays because there are no rotation objects. As a conservation manager, even if I'm initially unsure how we will solve a problem, I always have confidence that we will. As you all know, you're Conservators, problem solving is our forte, and I get a real thrill from complex challenges. As an example, this is the modern textile artwork by Pay White, again at Bloomberg headquarters in London. The room is round and the artwork was fixed via Velcro to the face of curved metal bars at the top and bottom by art installers with very little textile knowledge and actually not very good practical thinking. During one of our annual condition checks, we identified that the tension in the concave textile was actually pulling itself off the mount. And so after a bit of experimentation, we were able to redesign the existing system that allowed Velcro tabs to extend around to the back of the metal bars. And each of the panels was taken down in rotation and worked over a long weekend. We were only allowed to work when the building was closed. And we added a dustproof lining to the hanging mechanism first and then sewed the Velcro on hinges so that the stitching didn't disturb the view and then successfully stretched. Likewise, with the Manx Museum project, the TT project, we agreed and quoted on designing and manufacturing articulated mannequins with no real idea at all how we were going to achieve this, just a belief that we would be able to resolve the issues. We were able to carry our clients along, however, by a reputation of delivering solutions to complex projects and through good client relationships. A crucial moment in any potential new project is to quickly establish common ground and rapport with the client. Usually, I can achieve this through shared enthusiasm for the objects, their stories, as well as the project itself. One needs to come across as confident and capable of delivering what the client requires, so listening to their needs is very important. And sometimes if the client doesn't have enough conservation knowledge, you need to gently guide them in the right direction. And less very experienced clients rarely understand the lead-in time required for complex textile projects and mounting, particularly the mounting of costume. Both these projects were very administration heavy at the outset because of the numbers of objects involved and the need to establish the budgets. Time must be allowed for outsourcing and developing component parts before conservation and mounting can begin in earnest. So one needs to be aware of your supplier's lead-in times and relay that to the client. However, of course, the bottom line is the installation deadline as well as the available budget, and that will dictate what it's possible to achieve. Pragmatism is therefore important, and it helps to be flexible and relaxed and constantly reappraise your priorities because complex projects continuously evolve and change direction. It goes without saying that communication with the client is paramount so that they, and consequently you, feel informed and confident in the progress of the work and any changes being made. Regular conversations, updates, visits to the studio, and shared involvement in decision-making where applicable can all lead to a smoother running project. Flagging issues early is a good idea so you can resolve them together. And in this way, one's client hopefully also becomes an advocate for you as a conservation team, because when you work freelance, you're often not included in important meetings like budget meetings and with designers even, and press and public relations. Being open to and responsive to public relation requests is also essential for our clients. And of course, it's good publicity for the studio as well. The example you can see on the left, when we put up this very fragile Sol Bay tapestry, we had to do it in front of television cameras. So I thought it was quite scary and I didn't really want to do it, but you have to. A little bit now about time management. Whether running commercial or institutional conservation projects, we all know that time management is critical for many obvious reasons. At my studio, we require each conservator to record their time for each process against an object timesheet. With complex, long-running projects, it's wise to write up your notes as you work. And all of this needs weekly monitoring so that any issues are noted and resolved before they become bigger problems. With a large team, time management is also important to achieve consistency of approach with your treatment outcomes and approaches. We still record treatment hours on a physical timesheet, like the one that you can see on the lower right and upper left. But we also use the timekeeping app Xero, digital timekeeping app Xero, as there's nothing. But we always look at the written timesheet as well. I'm really strict about this because that's the way conservators keep in their mind how many more hours are left on a project. So how did we organise this work? One of the challenges was, in fact, this organisation of the work with the effigy project, because it had to be undertaken over 2 sites, our Brighton studio and a temporary shared conservation laboratory at Westminster Abbey in London, which is 50 miles away. Over the 3-year period, the work was broken down into 4 phases. Phase 1 was the effigies being stabilised and meticulously documented and undressed on site. And then the next phase was removing the removed clothing, and wigs were transported to the conservation studio in Brighton for treatment, and the life-sized effigies stayed on site for conservation. Phase 3 involved the conservation of those items that remained behind at Westminster Abbey, such as very large robes and the effigies. And obviously we were running phase 2 and 3 concurrently, so we had a team at Westminster Abbey at the same time as we were working in the studio. And then there was the partial redressing of the effigies down in the, everything got transported back to London, and then the effigies were redressed in London on the effigy bodies. And that was only partially done before they were taken up to the galleries because the wax was too fragile to allow vibration where it could be taken off. So we had to evolve a way of carrying the effigies up to the gallery. And then the next challenge was that the gallery wasn't finished, and it was supposed to be finished, and we were supposed to be installing into a dust-free environment, but that didn't happen. We did our final photography upstairs in the new galleries and the case installations. Studio conservation was undertaken by my whole team, and this gave good staff development opportunities and valuable experience for our various interns, whilst we had a dedicated core team working at Westminster Abbey during the various phases, and they dressed the cases. The rest of the studio programme had to run alongside this 3-year project, including other complex projects like the ones at Knoll that I mentioned. So to help manage this, one of my senior conservators at the time, Rachel Rhodes, took the lead on the Westminster Abbey administration, and she ran the studio in London. And I managed the studio in Brighton and ran all our other projects. Sadly, because of time constraints, I can't really go into the actual treatments much, but a lot of it has been published and presented elsewhere. Many of the 350 items were very simply surface cleaned or washed and minimally repaired, but we also undertook many complex treatments, some posing interesting ethical conundrums and involving innovative solutions. For example, the retreatment of Elizabeth I's very sorry-looking costume, which was actually an 18th century replacement of the Tudor costume. It was important that this effigy looked presentable because it was going to be displayed in front of a large portrait of the late Queen Elizabeth II, as if they were in conversation with each other. So we needed to re-regalise this costume. With the racing leathers, a very similar approach was taken with estimating and treating the various components of the 10 riders' outfits, which included leathers, helmets, boots, gloves, and goggles. Much was confined to minimal surface cleaning and structural support where necessary, but several of the outfits required major conservation and reconstruction. For example, the leathers worn by Mike Halewood in 1979, which he had been cut out of after a very bad accident. And these leathers were being displayed as if he was doing his final win at the TT, which had actually happened before this accident. So we had to close up the damage and make it strong enough to be mounted, but we didn't remove the evidence of the accident or the scraping of the leather. The conservation of the helmet worn by Beryl Swain was another major project. Beryl Swain was a completely amazing woman. She was the first woman to ride the TT race, and in fact, after she rode in 1962, they changed the rules to ban women, whatever. This was a major treatment involving reconstructed elements and interesting material innovations. Other conservation treatments included major humidification, reshaping and consolidating of stiff flaking leather of the earlier leathers from the early part of the 20th century, and also some interesting modern materials. Here you can see a timeline for the TT project. We started during lockdown in the pandemic in 2020, and it ran through until March 23. The pandemic and the very strict isolation rules on the Isle of Man, which were different to mainland UK, meant that we only had access to measure the motorcycles and the sidecars once in January 22, which was partway through the project, and this was a huge challenge. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the mounting and the role of the body. Mounting the garments for both projects shared similarities in scope and approach, and it's interesting to compare the role of the effigy body with the articulated TT mannequin. With the effigies, and really against our conservator instincts, multi-layered costume, historic costume, had to be remounted, tightly layered as before over the effigy. And as you probably also do, textile conservators nowadays rarely layer historic costume. Instead, we recreate the historic silhouette and provide conservation support via bespoke underpinnings mounted over much smaller mannequins that we pad out to fit the costume to avoid straining it. This methodology wouldn't have worked with the effigy. It was an object, an entire object, the effigy and the layers of clothing. So instead, we had to come up with ways of inserting thin, isolating layers, often choosing slippery textures, avoiding adding bulk in key areas. So in the image in the middle with the gilded leather petticoat, you can see that we've hung padding that was needed to support the folds in the leather and the next layer that went on over to the top. We hung these on tapes so that it didn't bulk up around the waist, or the next garment wouldn't have fitted. We used a similar approach with the TT racing leathers, incorporating subtle layers, support layers that were slippery, both on the insides of the delicate leathers. We made a kind of silky jumpsuit that we inserted into the leathers first before we put the mount in. And this protected the delicate leathers and the conservation treatment and allowed the padded mannequin limbs to be inserted. And I'll talk a bit more about those in a minute. With the funeral effigies, each historic effigy not only performed the role of a unique and handcrafted mannequin for the conserved garment, but it also provided the specific persona and lifelike shape of the person being memorialized. So our influence over this aspect was obviously limited to just tidying up the effigy bodies and protecting both the effigy and the garments with these thin, isolating layers that I've mentioned. One exception was undertaking the repairing Charles II's effigy. He died in 1685, and the costume dates to that time as well. You can see the effigy before we worked on it in the middle picture. It had been worked on previously, and they'd reset the legs in the wrong position. So with curatorial advice and using evidence found in historic portraiture and on the effigy itself, it proved possible to return the original courtly pose to the Stuart king by altering the position of the legs and the pelvis. And you can see our the partly dressed finished mannequin on the right with the weight of the pose on the back leg. And that's how Charles always stood in portraits. So a little bit now about the dynamic mannequins. With the TT display, the conserved motorcycle outfits needed to be presented over the original motorcycles in a very similar way, to the effigies, but with our custom-made mannequins, enabling lifelike poses and bringing out the specific personas of the individual racing champions in the way that the funeral effigies did. We had to create the role of the effigy through the mannequin from scratch, physically and visually conjuring up the essence of the individual racing persona, on which we displayed their garments on their motorbikes. So in a way, it's a very similar sort of complete object to the effigies. You can see a shot of the TT race on the right, upper right, and a finished mannequin on the lower right. Ardent TT fans are intimately familiar with the nuance of each rider. They're able to identify them racing past them at, enormous speeds. So we were quite worried about making these effigies, making these mannequins look like the people they were supposed to be. So we went to great lengths to create accurate, articulated mannequins, and we watched lots and lots of film clips of the race. We studied hundreds of photographs of the individual motorcycle riders to understand how they sat on their bikes and how they crouched down, etc. And we also used live models in the studio to try and understand how the body moves in the positions. And when we were actually installing, we had a TT race rider called Jason Crow. You can see him on the top left. And he posed in the various racing positions, particularly on the side cars, which are extraordinary machines. And it was very difficult for us to anticipate the shape that the bodies needed to be in beforehand. Both projects presented access issues with dressing. With the effigies not coming apart in a conventional museum mannequin way, redressing the conserved garments without damaging them was really challenging. Arms were not removable, for example, and only some of the delicate wax elements could be released partway through undressing or redressing. We worked with specialist wax conservator Valerie Kaufman to avoid damaging these unique wax heads, décolletage areas, arms, hands, and legs, and we inserted barrier layers in between the wax and the textile clothing to protect them from each other. The challenge with the racing leathers was their all-in-one construction. They fasten just down the center by a zip, and this makes access to removable arms and legs and articulated spines impossible. Instead, we worked with a specialist metal mount maker called Mike Penwolf, who actually worked in our building, which was very useful. And we created and developed an articulated metal skeleton of stainless steel and aluminium that had movable ball joints and hinge joints exactly like a skeleton. And we could insert that into the leathers without tightening the joints, so it was movable. And once inside, the required pose could be achieved via the zip fastening to tighten up the hips and the shoulders and the back. And then we could remotely lock off the pose of the elbows and the knees by accessing through the wrists and the ankles. And then when we got to the Isle of Man and we dressed the mannequins, we could adjust the positions again once they were on the motorcycles. Padding up the articulated skeletons required much experimentation and ingenuity to create a realistic muscled body on top of this metal skeleton that didn't hinder access to the joints for adjustment once the figures were on the motorbikes. And remember, these motorbikes were museum objects as well, so we couldn't fix the mannequins to the bikes. They had to be held over them by hidden mounts to carry the weight and hold them securely. And just quickly mention the role of research. A crucial and subtle aspect to the success of these complex projects is achieved and enhanced through thorough research that we undertake to understand and appreciate the stories of the objects and the people they represent, even though this is something we never really get paid for. We find that knowing as much as possible about the individual histories of the objects we conserve promotes better engagement and involvement of the whole team, and this in turn produces a more successful result. Piecing together the rich history of the effigies and the people that they memorialised, as well as their past care and conservation through the Westminster Abbey archives, supplementing it by other published sources, paintings, newspaper cuttings, and the research of specialist scholars over the years, proved invaluable for understanding the significance and history of the objects we were tasked with conserving. This in turn influenced our decision-making processes too. Although possessing a much shorter history than the effigies and initially knowing absolutely nothing about TT motorcycle racing, it was through engaging with the personal stories and histories of the race riders, the race itself, and its importance to the people of the Isle of Man, that we found a personal connection, enabling us to create such realistic conservation mounts, which we were very relieved and delighted to find exceeded our clients' expectations. In the lower right of the slide, you can see us consulting with Dave Molyneux wearing the orange beanie hat. He is just a kind of iconic sidecar designer and racer, and he came to have a look at his own mannequin, which was a weird experience for him. And the photo you can see on the far lower right is myself and Anya, and we actually went round the motorcycle track on bikes at very high speed for research purposes. Here you can see one of the images that we used in helping mount the Mike Halewood outfit that I mentioned earlier. Mike Halewood was a really iconic TT winner. He won 14 times, and he raced over a period from 1958 to 1979, when sadly his life was cut short, ironically not on a motorbike, but just in an ordinary car accident at quite low speeds. And here are some final images of the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Galleries at the Westminster Abbey, which opened in 2018, and some shots of the TT Gallery, which opened in 2023. So just to wrap up, alongside these large-scale projects, a commercial studio needs numerous smaller ones to plug the gaps and help with cash flow. Whilst we have a very long-established heritage sector, well-versed in conservation in the UK, private conservation businesses are very susceptible to economic change, and we at my studio have weathered great periods of adversity caused by economic downturn, COVID-19, pandemic, Brexit, and more recently losing our long-standing business premises, which forced an unexpected studio move. Finding suitable new premises after more than 20 years in one building, de-installing our laboratory and washrooms, and navigating moving the contents of a 400 square metre studio while still maintaining the work programme has been my biggest challenge yet. Since November last year, we've been focused on re-establishing ourselves in our new premises, which you can see here, drawing deep on the experience gained from working these large-scale projects. So far, so good. I made it here, so that's good. And as you can see, we're busy still with large-scale projects. Only last week, we were reinstalling a very large piece of 19th century silk damask at the Rothschild Mansion, Waddesdon in Buckinghamshire. And this hanging is only 10% of the wall hangings in the room. So we continue on with this work in the autumn. So, to conclude, there are many business models for project management. Some of them are even aimed at conservation. The ZT methodology, if you want to call it that I've outlined today, has evolved iteratively and has worked for us for about 25 years. Managing complex projects alongside running a busy conservation studio requires a combination of flexibility, an ability to juggle constantly changing priorities. One also needs to have a thirst for problem solving, endless energy, and a good dose of steely determination. Being able to establish good dialogue and rapport with one's clients is also essential, and this often results in long-standing friendships and relationships with curators and other staff from other institutions, owners and administrators well beyond the life of the project. All of those people contribute to the shared achievement of such large, challenging undertakings. But perhaps most of all, it requires a skilled, committed team and a sympathetic partner. And I'm luckily blessed with both of those. So it's to these wonderful people that this paper is dedicated, with enormous thanks. I just quickly need to particularly thank Westminster Abbey and Manx Museum for permission to talk about their projects and to use their images. And then the clients are listed below. So enormous gratitude to my team. We couldn't do these projects without them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Zenzie, for your very nice presentation. We are just a little bit over the time, 1 minute. I think we can sneak one question if anyone. Yeah, we have one question, just a quick one. So we have someone.
Sorry for running over.
It's okay.
Good morning. Thank you for such an insightful presentation. I have a question about your team. Is it a fixed team? Because your projects are very diverse, and even in textile field, there's a lot of information to take in. So do you hire specialists working in specific fields? Because as we saw, it needs even engineering and such. So I'm interested how that process is.
Yeah. We do have a fixed team, as much as that is possible. Many people in my team have been with me for more than 10 years. And I find that's really important because you need to work together closely. And that's the core textile conservation team. I do use other freelance conservators when we need to. With the TT project, yes, we worked with a specialist metal mount maker and engineer to create the articulated mannequin. My husband, who's also a conservator, he has a huge range of skills. He's worked on lots of different materials, so we use his skills. But yes, so we do bring in specialists when we need to. And obviously we work on some of these projects. We are working with other specialist conservators who've been brought in by the client.
Thank you.
Do we have one more question?
We can have more questions.
Oh, okay. I also have a question about the huge works. How do you manage to see how it will hang in the future? Like, how do you manage to see the tension? It's more a practical question, I guess, because it takes a lot of people to just bring it up. So how do you manage that?
I mean, usually, well, we have a hanging mechanism in the studio. We have high ceilings, so we would always hang, if we're working on a tapestry, for example. After we finished the main conservation stitching through the linen support, we would hang it to see how it's hanging, and we always hang it again after lining. And so we, as much as possible, we try and replicate the hanging situation, whether it's free hanging or on a board or whatever. Sometimes things, are not taken down. We work on them in situ. The very large tapestry that you saw with the scaffold, we didn't take it down. It stayed up. We had a very scary time hanging the silk panel last week at Waddesdon. I've taken lots of wall hangings down. It's not my preference. I think they're better treated in situ. But I've never taken down such a delicate silk wall hanging. There was no stretch left in it. It was very weak, and we were very anxious about how that would hang. So we created a template from Tyvek, and we did a practice run of how we would rehang it. And it did go back all right, and we'll be monitoring it. And I think also experience helps you know these things.
Okay, thank you. And another question. You said that you try to involve your clients in the work. Had there been any situation where the involvement of the client helped in the situations where the budget needed to be brought in?
Yes, sometimes. I mean, it depends who you're dealing with. I mean, in a big organization, you might be dealing with, say, the head of conservation or the project manager, and if you can get them to advocate for you and the conservation needs, they can then go and argue for budget more strongly. I just think that you need to really communicate and talk as much as possible, because that's helpful. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes you don't have enough budget and you just have to do your best.
Okay, thank you so much.
Do we have more questions? Audience, please. Okay, I'll ask one question then.
We have here one question.
We have a question, okay.
I'm a textile conservator from the Conservation Center Keynote, and I have a short question. You said that you put a barrier between the effigy and the clothing. What was it?
Bondina, I think. I'd have to check.
Okay, thank you.
We took advice from the wax conservator, and you know, obviously when you have these composite objects, sometimes the materials are not compatible with each other. We heard about that yesterday. And so, yeah, the wax obviously doesn't really want to be touched by anything, and the textile doesn't want to be against the wax, which can still be a little bit greasy.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation, and my not a question but only comment. You have touched one very important topic, the relationship with customer, and it's a new topic in our presentations, and it's, if you let me comment, it's very important, and it could be a good example in the future to discuss about it, about this subject in other presentations, because it's very, very important thing, this connection between two different skills,
Yes.
customer and restorer, and it needs managed very good. So, but my congratulations to your presentations. Just no questions.
Okay, thank you. I agree. It's very important.
Any more? Anyone? Okay, I'll ask then my question. It's very interesting, how do you manage the consistency of restoration or conservation quality when you have such a large scale objects with such a large team? So there's many individuals that work on the same piece, and how do you manage to keep it in the same level of quality?
I think it's down to picking your team carefully, and also, actually, to be frank, we've always taken interns, and often an intern will become a member of the team later, and that's because we've spent time with them and we've helped to influence their training, and we know that their personality is going to fit into the team. I would say that the team spirit is equally important as the conservation skills. And then we all have really, really high standards of conservation. I don't keep conservators who don't have those same standards. So we all work together, and I can't really emphasize how important my team is. You know, if we lose key members, it really disrupts the team, and it takes a long time to recover. I have one key person on maternity leave at the moment, and I'm kind of slightly lost without her, to be frank. So, you know, it's really important.
Thank you. So it's very important to keep your team happy and motivated, because there's such a long time when you're working on one project.
And it's quite difficult because financially, you know, we don't make a huge amount of money. I don't know what it's like here, but we don't make a massive amount of money from conservation. So I'm not able to offer really, really high salaries. It's just a good team spirit and a work environment and interesting objects that attracts people to work with us.
Thank you, Zenzie.
Thank you.